Hey everyone, welcome back to Alp's Mustang Garage. We are back on the 289 engine rebuild, and we're going to be jumping into piston ring installation. First thing we're going to do though is check the piston ring end gap. Okay, if you haven't done so yet, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you're getting a lot of good information out of the content, it does help our channel with growth, which helps us to produce more videos to help you guys. So jumping right into piston rings, you can get obviously a lot of different types of piston rings depending on what your build. I'm not here to try to help you pick out the right parts for your build. I'm just kind of here to help demonstrate how to install these. So we're keeping things relatively stock here with this build. But if you get like a piston ring setup that kind of looks like it's labeled like 1, 2, and 3, that's going to be your top ring here. So you're going to have your top groove, and then your second compression groove, and then your oil groove. So that's how those are labeled, like 1, 2, 3, top, middle, bottom. Okay. So, but we're going to check the ring gaps. Okay. So this here is going to be, we're going to work on cylinder 1 so I can keep everything kind of organized. I'm going to check the gap on cylinder 1, and then we're going to install them on cylinder 1's piston. So let's put this here into the groove. And I have one of these tools to square the piston ring in the bore, because obviously if it's not square in the bore, you're not going to get a very accurate check on that. Okay, now the spec on a relatively stock 289, like aside from doing performance engine builds, we're keeping things relatively stock. So the specification on this, we should be sitting about between 10 and 20 thousandths of an inch. And now we're going to use our feeler gauges and kind of see where we're at. So I'm going to get the 10 thousandths feeler gauge out and kind of see where we are. And you're looking for just a kind of a slight drag. That feels a little loose to me. So let's step it up a little bit to 15 thousandths. So right smack in the middle of our specification that we want. That has a slight drag to it. It actually feels really good. So we could probably put this right there. If I go to a 16 thousandths, that's tight. Okay, 16 is tight, 15 is right there. So that's like perfect. That's like right in the middle of our spec between 10 and 20 thousandths. So that's actually our bottom ring right there. So let's do the same thing for the top ring. Okay, so I'm going to jump right back into the 15 thousandths, right in the middle, and see how that feels. It feels a little loose. It might be 16 on this one. Oh yeah, it's like 15 is a little loose, but 16 is a little tight, so it might be kind of right in between there. So that's acceptable. That's passing. So both the top and the bottom rings on this are going to be the same spec. Okay, so now that you have determined that your gap for your two top rings are correct, you can start installing these. So I checked the gap in this bore. I mean, all your bores should be the same, but I checked them in this bore, which is cylinder 1. We're going to install them onto cylinder 1's piston. So first thing we're going to do is install the oil ring expander. That one goes on pretty easy. There's really not a whole lot to that. They don't like clip into place. They just kind of butt up next to each other. I try to put these like on one of the skirt sides like this, and then you're going to have 2 thinner oil rings. These are all going to be in package 3. And so what I'm going to do is install one of these gaps is going to install on the right hand side of this, roughly an inch or so, and then the other one, the ring gap, is going to be on the left side. You can kind of like move it around once you're in there. Okay, so you have your bottom oil ring, and the gap is over here. So I'm going to put the top oil ring, so the gap is over here. Okay, just like that. That's what I like to do. Okay, so that is the completion of your 3rd groove, or your oil ring grooves in the expander. So now we can install our number 2 set, and we're going to go right here in this groove here. Okay, so a little bit about piston rings. Like, they're all going to be a little different, but like this second groove here on our particular engine, it has a little like bevel. This is like grooved, if you can kind of see that on camera. It also has an indicator. It says top on here, so that way it makes it installing it this way, not this way. And that bevel is going to be different on different applications and different piston rings. This is going to kind of act like an oil squeegee, as it kind of like squeegees that oil down to the bottom. When you install your top groove on this particular setup, it doesn't have a bevel at all. And this is going to be the closest to the heat, so this is going to get the hottest. So it wants this one to seal up better than all the rest of the piston rings. So, moving into installing, now that we've covered orientations, I do like to use piston ring installers to make it safe. Okay. That just makes that much easier to install. So I'm going to install this gap over the pin bore here for the connecting rod. And then we're going to flip this over, and we're going to put the gap of the top ring exactly opposite of it. So you want to stagger those. Now on this one, some piston rings will have like a dot, or they will have labeling marking top. This one doesn't have any sort of marking on it. What that means is you can install this either way, okay? And that's like how you tell. So, but if it did have a dot, then you would want that facing upward. Okay, perfect. So we have a gap here and a gap here. And then our oil rings we already had set up. I'm just going to double check, make sure those are in where I want them. Okay, so this piston is now almost ready for installation. So, okay. So we want to like clean our cylinder out. We want to make sure everything is good in there. I'm using a lint-free cloth. You can see how dirty it can get. Lint-free cloth, not a microfiber, not a red towel, lint-free. Okay, so when we're clean, we're gonna lubricate the cylinder walls with a little bit of engine oil as well. We're just gonna put it on my hand. I'm just gonna go in like here. That way that cylinder is well lubricated and ready to go. So before I actually install a piston into its bore, I like to install the bearing first. So we're not going to put assembly lube on the bottom side, just like how we did the crankshaft. You need that to grip. You need assembly lube on the top side here. Okay, bearing is in, and we'll put some assembly lube right here. Okay, so piston's ready to install. Got my bearing lubed, I got my cylinder wall lubed. I have my piston ring compressor. Now you can buy these like specifically for the size of the bore you have, and this is actually tapered, so as you install the piston it kind of compresses the rings. There's also universal ones that are kind of cheaper, but honestly these ones are not very expensive at all. It's just you can only use it on this bore size. So the other thing that I do, the notch here in the piston is going to go towards the front of the engine, and I've turned the crankshaft so that the journal is all the way down. I've also put little rubber feet on my connecting rod bolts, so I'm not going to scratch or ding anything as we do this. And here we go. Drop that into place. Might have to kind of push the rings around to get them to drop in. Okay. So this installer it's tapered, so and it just as I push this down in, it's going to compress those piston rings. So now we're just going to gently kind of tap her in like this. As we go down, it's just further compressing those rings. And at the same time, I have my hand underneath just to make sure my connecting rod doesn't hit the crank or anything like that. And just like that, there's number one piston installed. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to rotate around a little bit. It should be tight enough that it's not going to just fall right out. But I'm going to reach in here and kind of like align the crank rod or connecting rod. And I'm just going to kind of continue to kind of tap her. Okay, so now that's kind of up into place, we can get our connecting rod cap on, and we're going to use the plastic gauge to kind of check the clearance on that, and put a bearing in it and torque her down and call her good. Okay, so we have our plastic gauge in. Now this rod cap has to go a certain way. You can't just throw it on anyway. Usually they're like stamped. There'll be like a number 1 here and a number 1 here. But also, the little notch for the bearing should also match the upper bearing notch. So, I want to make sure these are installed correctly. And we're not putting assembly lube on right now because we're just checking the clearances. That's all we're doing. Okay, so the torque spec on these are 19 to 24 foot-pounds. I'm going to kind of go in the middle at 22 should be just fine. And I'm weird, I kind of like to bounce back and forth a little bit. There's 22. I like to go slow because I like to feel what's happening. So now that you're torqued down, we're just gonna take that back off and we're gonna see what our plastic gauge looks like. Okay, so there's the imprint there of the rod bearing. So if we use our plastic gauge, now keep in mind this is not like a precision measuring tool. This is just kind of like a rough guide estimate to kind of, you know, double check your machine shop, because if everything's machined properly, like, you shouldn't have any issues. But we're just double checking and making sure everything's good. It looks like kind of looks like roughly 2, right? You see that's about 2 thousandths. I think we're looking at 2 thousandths clearance there. Okay, so like with that plastic gauge, again, this isn't like super precise. It's just a method of just kind of like checking and make sure your machine shop kind of like machined everything correctly. So the spec on the rod bearing clearance is going to be 9 to 29 ten thousandths of an inch. If you wanted to round it up, it's like 1 to 3 thousandths. So when we put our gauge up in here, like it is, I want to say it's like between the 15 and 20 ten thousandths, more like a 15 right there. So we're essentially good on that rod bearing and journal. I'll just kind of do that with every single one that we install. Okay, so now we just gotta like put our connecting rod cap back on and torque it for good. However, like you want to watch your bearing here. You're gonna watch out for that to kind of like come out of place, which has happened here. So we're gonna kind of knock this piston down just a little bit. Okay, so now you got your bearing back into place. We'll just kind of knock this back up in. Get some assembly lube. Make sure we're installing it correctly, notch to notch, indication mark to indication mark. The other thing that I like to do is just put a little bit of oil on these rod studs. I like to do this in stages, 5, 10, 15, and then the final torque at 22. So that is what I will do when I'm installing my pistons and rods. And then we just gotta repeat all that for the next setup. Okay, so that is your piston ring and piston installation. I hope that was informative and helpful for those that are watching. One thing to kind of touch on that I didn't kind of elaborate on when I installed the first one, I like to put oil on the piston skirts and the rings. That way, like, everything is really pre-lubed, and, you know, oiling up the cylinder walls and everything. So that way it's all pre-lubed and ready to go on that initial startup. So we didn't talk about that, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. But other than that, just got to keep it clean, keep everything lubed, do your due diligence, take your time, make sure everything is correct, and you should be fine. So other than that, give the video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. It does help us to produce more videos for you guys. And until next time, we'll catch you next time.